Welcome to Playback, Tier 2 World's weekly showcase of our best stories from around the globe. Coming up, tens of thousands of Ukrainian women have joined the fight against Russian forces. We went to meet some of them on the front lines. The European Council accuses Russia of causing a global food crisis. Lawmakers in the U.S. consider stricter gun laws after a wave of mass shootings. Before the Ukraine conflict started, 15% of Ukraine's soldiers were women. Tens of thousands have joined the fight against Russian forces. Semir Seyfovich went to meet some of them on the front lines in the Black Sea city of Mykolaiv.
It's not an easy drive into Mykolaiv. The southern Ukrainian city is under bombardment by the Russian military. Ukrainians have taken up arms to defend the city. Some are women, including this mother of two.
My motivation is simple: to defend our country. If Ukraine is protected, the economy of our country will be better, and the future of our children will be better. I have two children, and I want their future to be better, so I'm here because I have to be. Of course I'm worried about them, and of course they're worried about me. It would be better for the family if I were around, but the family understands and supports me. My family loves Ukraine, and I love Ukraine. They understand why I do it, but it's hard.
Here in Mykolaiv, men and women fight side by side. They're trying to stop the seizure of another strategic city in the Black Sea region. The city has been under constant attacks, and battles are raging on its outskirts.
Morale is high among Ukrainian soldiers, but the battle is now in the fourth month, and casualties are mounting. Russian forces have been advancing, and the soldiers we spoke to didn't want to give their last names due to personal security concerns.
We eat together, we tell stories, but you realize that sooner or later, one of them will be affected by the dark sides of war. Looking at each of them, you think, please, not him, just not him, and so on and so on. It's the hardest thing to start understanding the fact that today we are together and tomorrow may not come for someone. So I had to do something to protect my country, to protect the future of my country. My daughter, she's Ukrainian, she's still very young. She has a life ahead of her. She wants to live in this country, and I am trying to do everything I can to make that happen.
Moments later, the Russian military starts shelling our position. Soldiers race to the front line as another Russian mortar flies above our car. It strikes a residential building and kills two civilians. Two civilians who won't see tomorrow. Semir Seyfovich, TRT World, Mykolaiv, Ukraine.
Now, the UN World Food Programme estimates the number of people in Sudan facing emergency levels of hunger will double this year to 18 million. That's as the food crisis there worsens, with the economy stagnant since the military took control in a coup last year. Farmers blame the junta, which they say has not honored commitments to purchase their crops. Reagan Devine reports.
The Kremlin is using food supplies as a stealth missile against developing countries.
Speaking directly to Moscow's UN ambassador, the European Council president did not mince words.
Russia is solely responsible for this food crisis, Russia alone, despite the Kremlin's campaign of lies and disinformation. The EU has no sanctions on the agricultural sector in Russia, zero. And even our sanctions on the Russian transport sector do not go beyond our EU borders. You may leave the room. Maybe it's easier not to listen to the truth, the ambassador.
Charles Michel kept going in the ambassador's absence. Ukraine is a large producer of grain, but it's unable to export most of it because Russia is blockading ports on the Black Sea. The Ukrainian president says 20 to 25 million tonnes of grain are stuck in silos, like these ones in Odessa port.
For us, it's important to have a secure corridor of ships, so a fleet, or a fleet from a different country, which allows us to export the grain. We've talked to the UK and Turkey. Turkey is now searching for a format to provide us with guarantees.
A New York Times article has accused Russia of trying to ship stolen Ukrainian grain to buyers overseas, including drought-stricken countries in Africa. The US Secretary of State backed that claim.
There are credible reports, including, as we saw in one of our leading newspapers today, that Russia is pilfering Ukraine's grain exports, to sell for its own profit. Now, Russia is hoarding its food exports as well. So this is all deliberate. We know that. President Putin is stopping food from being shipped and aggressively using his propaganda machine to deflect or distort responsibility because it hopes it'll get the world to give in to him and end the sanctions. In other words, quite simply put, it's blackmail.
After more than 100 days of war, the ripple effects are being felt around the world. Claire Herriot, TRT World.
Europeans have been struggling with the rising cost of living since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. But the conflict in Ukraine is pushing fuel and food prices even higher and is threatening to undermine a fragile economic recovery. Spain is one of the countries worst hit by inflation. 95% of small and medium-sized businesses are reportedly affected by rising costs. Jaime Velasquez reports from Madrid.
The family of Carmelo Martinez has been baking bread since 1917 in this bakery in Vallecas, a working-class neighborhood in Madrid. Over the last century, his predecessors have gone through many difficulties, including the Spanish flu, several economic crises, a civil war, and most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. But Martinez says inflation spurred by the war in Ukraine is making it hard to do business.
This is the most difficult time I've had to go through.
The soaring prices of wheat and the diesel that runs these ovens are bringing this business to its knees.
Right now, we're losing money. The wheat has doubled its price and so has the fuel. Thank God my father planned well. We have some savings to carry on and survive, but it's true that business is in danger.
Spain has one of the highest inflation rates in Europe, 8.7%, despite government efforts to contain prices. A recent survey by a Spanish business group shows 15% of small and medium-sized businesses are struggling to survive.
If this doesn't stop by the end of the year, I think a lot of businesses will have to close shop.
Rising energy and material costs are narrowing profit margins of half of Spanish businesses. 6 out of 10 have already increased the prices of their products, contributing to a spiraling inflation. The cost of living in Spain has climbed steeply. The Spaniards are spending the equivalent of about $3,000 more per year than they were before COVID. And in this working-class neighborhood of Madrid, every cent counts. The challenge is how to protect the people's purchasing power. Increasing salaries is tempting, but it might not be the solution.
We need to explain to the citizens that if we do not contain salaries, this will never end. If you push the salaries up to try to match the inflation, this is only going to generate a second wave of inflation, and the situation will be even worse.
The war in Ukraine and the resulting disruptions to supply chains are likely to continue for the coming months. And it's the sincere hope of the local customers that Carmelo and his family can continue to put bread on their tables through and beyond this latest crisis. Jaime Velázquez, TRT World, Madrid.
To the U.S. now, where lawmakers are considering stricter gun laws after the latest wave of mass shootings. Leonie Lacani has more.
More than 30 mass shootings in the United States over the last 10 days, with the number of victims continuing to rise. Across the country this weekend alone, at least a dozen people were left dead due to gun violence. Images from Philadelphia showed people rushing from the scene following a shootout between rival groups in a popular part of the city. It happened just as a new memorial opened in the capital to commemorate the lives lost to gun violence. more than 45,000 flowers to represent the Americans who died in 2020. Now, 2 years on, the nation is still reeling from mass shootings, most recently at a school in Texas and a supermarket in New York, prompting the state's governor to take action.
It just keeps happening. Shots ring out, flags come down, and nothing ever changes, except here in New York.
On Monday, the governor signed into law a raft of gun control measures, which include new limits on buying assault-style weapons and body armor.
Thoughts and prayers won't fix this, but taking strong action will. And we'll do that in the name of the lives that have been lost, for the parents who will no longer see children stepping off a school bus, spouses won't see their husband and wife coming back from the grocery store.
Many of the laws adopted by New York are in line with the measures President Joe Biden last week pressed lawmakers in the U.S. Senate to pass. The recent spate of mass shootings is once again alighting fierce debate in Congress about tighter gun controls. It's a debate that's been had many times before, but this time the focus appears to be on school safety and mental health, although it's unclear whether these measures will gather enough support to become law. Leonie Lacani, TRT World, Washington.
Staying in the U.S., more than 10,000 migrants from Central and South America have joined a caravan in Mexico that's heading to the U.S. The migrants are walking to the border in search of a better life. Their journey coincides with the Summit of Americas taking place in Los Angeles. Yasmin El-Sabawi reports.
It may be the largest migrant caravan to make its way to the U.S. yet. The figure exceeds 10,000 people, families, the young, the old, from across Central and South America.
We want a future for our family. We're not violent. We just want a better future for our families.
They've been held back in southern Mexico for weeks and feel frustrated by the difficult process of obtaining a visa there. Most of them have left their countries due to poverty and violence. In this caravan, they have a sense of safety in numbers, and they want to send a message to the region's leaders, many of whom are in Los Angeles for the Summit of the Americas.
We tell the leaders, we are not any one currency. We are not going to wait until the Mexican Commission for Refugee Assistance decide on our lives in August.
Migration tops the summit's agenda for the Biden administration. The White House has insisted it wants to tackle the root causes of migration as the number of asylum seekers arriving at the southern border hits a new record. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris says she's secured more than $3 billion worth of investment in the countries of the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
This investment is on track to generate, as a result of what we have done so far, tens of thousands of jobs, investments in sectors such as agriculture and textiles. This investment also means that more than 10 million people will have access to banking services and credit.
But there is a catch. The presidents of Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras have all declined the invitation to be here, citing the White House's exclusion of Latin American regimes deemed unfriendly to the U.S. Yet they're at the very heart of the migration question, suggesting that they may not want to confront it and instead leave it to Washington. Yasmin El-Sabawi, TRT World, Los Angeles.
We have more to come here on Playback, including extreme financial pressure in Lebanon has created a thriving domestic market for local experiences. Israel is due to release classified trial documents of an investigation that has been sealed for decades. Palestinian families have been waiting to learn the truth. German intelligence warns PKK terrorists make up the biggest foreign extremist group in the country. According to a 2021 intelligence report, the group has been recruiting members and raising millions of dollars for terror funding. Berlin has recognized the PKK as a terrorist organization since 1993, but as Sibah Karkush reports from its German capital, its security forces don't always treat it like one.
From money laundering and drug dealing to human trafficking and terror funding, Europol has laid out the activities of the PKK terror group in Germany. Its government says it's well aware of them.
Our attitude towards the PKK remains the same. It's classified as a foreign terrorist association and is being fought as such.
But it seems like a half-hearted fight. Despite a general ban, the PKK has been freely holding rallies in the heart of Europe and openly recruiting. And its affiliates, such as the YPG, are not recognized as terror groups. Germany recognized the PKK as an international terrorist organization nearly 3 decades ago. Back then, the PKK described the country as its war enemy number 2 right after Turkey. Since then, however, Germany has become the terrorists' backyard. An intelligence report shows its funding and recruitment activities are flourishing in the country. It says the PKK has more than 14,000 followers in Germany, who committed more than 300 crimes last year. They included violent attacks and property damage, mostly against the Turkish community. The terror organization raised nearly $18 million through various fundraising campaigns last year alone, according to the intelligence report. German officials warn PKK terrorists have become the biggest foreign extremist group in the country. But Germany is not its target.
Here they raise funds and try to exert political influence, and we see large-scale donation campaigns by organizations that are close to the PKK. Those funds are then used to finance the terror in Turkey.
The PKK is responsible for the deaths of more than 40,000 Turkish civilians and members of its security forces. Turkey last month summoned both French and German envoys to Ankara over the terror group's rallies in their countries.
We strongly warned them. We made it clear to Germany and France that we objected them allowing these terrorists to demonstrate in their countries. We requested that it not be allowed in the future.
The terror organization is strengthening its foothold in Germany, and officials will have to consider whether they want their trend to continue. Sibel Karkush, TRT World, Berlin.
Lebanon has been in an economic crisis for 3 years, leaving its population under extreme financial pressure. As Priyanka Navani reports from Beirut, it's forced them to go local when planning travel getaways, creating a new and thriving domestic market for made-in-Lebanon experiences.
For Jad Asi, Lebanon is one of the greatest countries on earth. Despite the economic crisis, he's determined to spread that conviction through his company Dayscapers, which puts an innovative spin on local tourism.
What we do is we choose an area. Let's for example, Aoura. We take a guest house in Aoura. We bring housewives from Aoura to make us local food, to introduce local food to people who don't know it. We go to historical places. We get a local guide from the area, so we benefit the people from the area.
It's important to Jad that tourism is accessible, which means bridging the gaps between previously sectarian areas and making his tours affordable.
Many people still cannot travel, and they will not be able to travel for the upcoming couple of years because of the inflation and the dollar rate and everything. So promoting affordable tours in your own country has a big uprising, and it will keep rising.
And in the small mountain village of Baskinta, Roland Bataish, the manager of Odom Retreat, a luxury glamping experience, says he hasn't let the crisis stop him. In fact, business is booming, partly due to the Lebanese diaspora, who number around 10 million.
We rely on tourism. So whatever the situation is, we still rely on tourism, and we have a very beautiful country. So we are, and we will always be from leading places in tourism and in hospitality.
Still, the past 3 years haven't been easy.
The most challenging thing was of course, the economic situation, the instability, because in 1 hour the dollar can go up and high in times 10, and during the explosion the tourism stopped.
While some businesses are thriving, thousands of others have been forced to close their doors. International tourism to Lebanon has dropped steeply since 2019, when the economic crisis began. The local currency has lost over 90% of its value, and there's been a rise in crime and general unrest. But the Minister of Tourism is inspired by what innovative Lebanese have been able to do and is hopeful that brighter days are ahead.
We are expecting
this summer, a very busy summer. We are expecting around 10,000 passengers per day. It means in 3-4 months, we will exceed the 1 million visitors to Lebanon. We are all ready to host our diaspora, our guests, and to discover the beauty of Lebanon.
Priyanka Navani, TRT World, Baskinta.
In 1956, a Palestinian community near the Jordanian border was devastated when 47 residents were gunned down by Israeli forces. The details of the investigation and court proceedings that followed have been sealed for decades, but in just over 2 weeks, some are due to be published. As Mustafa Fatih Yavuz reports, the family of those who died have been waiting for decades to learn the truth.
Saad Issa's family have lived in the city of Kafr Qasim in Israel for generations. The 48-year-old is one of many descendants of victims of the Kafr Qasim massacre, which was committed by the Israeli army in 1956. He says his mother told him the story of his grandfather, Ahmed Fresh.
أحمد فريج وكان من أول من سقطوا شهداء في مجزرة كفر قاسم في الموجة الأولى عندما عاد مع زملائه من العمل. كان يعمل في المحاجر خارج كفر قاسم مدينة كفر قاسم. عاد وهو راكب على الدراجة.
The Kafr Qasim massacre took place on the first day of the Sinai War in 1956. At the time, the area was under Israeli military rule. On October 29th, Israel imposed a 5 p.m. curfew on Palestinians, effective immediately. But many Kafr Qasim residents were away at work when the curfew was announced. Arriving home after 5 p.m., they were met with a barrage of gunfire. Israeli security forces killed 47 Palestinians that day. Israel tried and sentenced 11 soldiers and border police for their involvement in the massacre. In the following years, their sentences were progressively reduced, and some were pardoned or walked free within 3 years. But 5 years ago, an Israeli historian appealed for the release of documents related to the massacre, including the trial minutes. Last March, Israel's military appellate tribunal made a ruling on whether the documents should be made public, but it was subject to a gag order. 2 weeks ago, the gag order was lifted, but the contents of the ruling have not been published. If and when any of the sealed documents will be revealed is still unknown. Israel wants the details of the 1956 massacre to remain sealed, fearing security and foreign relations problems if they come to light. Issa Fresh lives in Kafr Qasim and is a minister in the current government. He testified at the court hearing and says publishing the documents won't harm Israeli security, but rather heal old wounds.
برأيي الدولة القوية المتينة اللي بتملك الثقة بنفسها يجب أن لا تتردد إنها تكشف عن ماضيها وحتى لو كان الماضي مظلم، لأنه نحن نتكلم عن دولة فيها عرب ويهود.
Palestinians in Kafr Qasim believe the massacre was a deliberate attempt to force Palestinians from the area into Jordan, part of a secret program called Operation Mole. They believe the sealed documents will prove it and allow the first steps towards justice. Mustafa Fatih, TRT World, Kafr Qasim, Israel.
Well, that rounds up your week of news here on Playback. Stay tuned to TRT World for the latest stories.